The tactic used by Dan Lanning at the end of the Oregon-Ohio State game was absolutely genius. It's undeniable that that is a really smart play from a defense. And to have practiced that situation, been prepared for it, and implement it in the heat of the moment is an impressive thing. So I think you have to start there, that it is commendable that that Dan Lanning did that on Saturday. But then also, it does open up kind of like, hey, this rule was really stupid to begin with, right? Like, you can't play with 12 players, especially if you're going to say that you care about player safety and things like that. Like, there can't just be there are 12 players on the field, therefore the play gets to go on. So the NCAA closed that loophole or changed their interpretation of the rule and says to everybody, hey, that's not going to fly anymore. You got one over on us. And again, I like, kudos to Dan Lanning for being prepared in that situation. But the NCAA says, like, this can't happen again, and this isn't going to happen again. We're going to make sure that it doesn't happen again. And I think that's probably the correct response, right? Like, sometimes things happen, or there's a loophole, or there's just something that you see that you're like, we need to ensure that we legislate this out of the game right now. And if that falls into this category, and I think it's ridiculous to be like, oh, it's just because Ohio State lost, they're throwing a hissy fit. I think you would see that more and more and more play out. And when you see something like incorrectly in the rules that it's exploited, I think the right thing to do is close that. But in that moment, to know that that loophole existed, know that you can execute that the way you want it to and manipulate the rules to give yourself an inherent advantage, I think is cool. I'm never going to run somebody down for doing that. But on the flip side, it shows that the NCAA has the ability to change and legislate things out of the game, which makes me question how and why has Ole Miss been allowed to have the old feigning goat trick with their offense 100 times a game. It's not actually 100 times a game. It's only 6. Yeah, I see you in the comments. 100 times a game, and the NCAA is like, there's nothing we can do. I understand that there's a rock and a hard place with figuring out what to do against teams who are very clearly faking injuries to buy themselves a little bit of time, because you don't want to put yourself in a situation where somebody is legitimately hurt and either A, they don't want to come off the field or don't try to come off the field because they're legitimately hurt if they go down and there's a something that has been put in place to turn that into a bad thing for your team. If the repercussions and the consequences are there, that it discourages somebody from trying to get off the field who is legitimately injured, the NCAA looks bad. And that's their like ultimate fear, is something happens and we look like barbarians because we put into place like, hey, anytime a player goes down, it's going to cost you a timeout. After that, it's a 15-yard penalty. That would work really quickly in curbing the fainting goat. It would also work really quickly to somebody having a concussion going, I don't know if it's Christmas or Tuesday, and I don't know where I am right now or what I was supposed to be doing, but I do know that if I can't get off the field right now, or if I can't get up, it's going to cost us 15 yards. And so they get up, or if somebody's got an arm that looks like they're Stretch Armstrong now, you're going to have to worry about running off the field or whatever. So I understand that there is a thought process that's really difficult to legislate. But at the same time, when something has happened one time to bring attention to the inadequacy of the rule, when Dan Lanning puts a display on that's like, hey, we purposely did this because the rules allow it and it benefits us. And you can find a way after one time of that happening to go, okay, we got to make sure that this does not happen again. how it continues to happen week after week. And by the way, Ole Miss is not the only culprit, the only guilty party that does this, right? Like, there are a lot of college football programs who have signals. Connor Stallions probably knows them, that there's a signal for, I need somebody to go down. The problem is it gets super obvious when like 2 or 3 guys see that signal and they do the fainting goat. And then it's incredibly obvious that, okay, y'all just cheated. But I don't understand how you get to the point where this is happening on a weekly basis, where it's affecting the flow of the game. It's affecting frankly, the integrity of the game, because there are just some things that you should tell the truth about, that there are just some aspects of the game that, like, by having some integrity and character and being like not piece of crappish, that you should be able to say, like, we are not going to attempt to gain an advantage by faking injuries. We don't want to be the boy who cried wolf. Like, there should just be almost a gentlemanly agreement that we're not going to do this, that we're all collectively, as a sport, as a whole, coaches, players, etc., we're all better and above that. But when you don't make people operate under those rules, there's going to be somebody who's going to exploit it, who doesn't have the character and the integrity that you would hope and expect that people, the sportsmanship that you would hope these people participating in the event will have. And when one person doesn't do it, then everybody is forced to operate in the same way. It's kind of like the anti-mob mentality that, like, I want to do the right thing. All of us want to do the right thing, but this jagoff does the wrong thing and it gives him a competitive advantage. Therefore, I cannot be at a competitive disadvantage. So I now need to operate in the same way. Does that suck? Yes. Yes, it does. And does it suck that you're going to try to put a team in a situation where they have to figure out, and I don't know if the solution is like, hey, you get 6 timeouts a half now, and that counts for injury timeouts you call, whatever the case may be. And after every timeout, if you have an injury after you're out of timeouts, it's a 15-yard penalty. While that sucks for kids who are legitimately injured, players who have a legitimate injury and can't get off the field, sorry, but you forced my hand with this. As a governing body, you forced the NCAA to say, we have to do something about this. And so while you might be put in a situation that's really, really bad for you or your team, you only have yourselves to blame. And I don't know if the NCAA can threaten that before they actually have to enact something that would get people to be like, okay, we can't be in a situation where our middle linebacker has a compound fracture in his leg and it's going to cost us 15 yards because we faked a bunch of injuries before that. I don't know if that will get people to turn around or not. But I think anybody who watches and pays attention to college football and sees that happening knows, like, that's wrong and something needs to be done about it. And while the something that needs to be done is likely difficult, you have to do the difficult things. And I don't know if threatening that, like, hey, if you guys don't get it together, we are going to put really stiff penalties in the rule book for what you're doing, whether that gets them to, whether that's a deterrent or not, I don't know. But I know, and you know, that something has to be done. So figuring it out is an utmost importance. And with this ruling, with the NCAA saying, we've seen it one time now, we have to put a stop to it, shows that you have the ability to see something and say, this cannot happen again. This cannot happen anymore. This cannot continue to happen. So once you've set that precedent, you have shown that you have that ability. And anything other than that is malpractice. You endorse what you allow. And when you allow teams to fake injuries, you are endorsing that this is A-okay. So do something about it is my ultimate message to the NCAA, or the coaches even too, like, hey, maybe that's just the place we stop playing around, and we stop playing around with the faked injuries or having a signal to have the fainting goat so we can buy a little extra time for our football game. Maybe you just don't play in that sandbox anymore. That'll do it for today's episode of the Daily Huddle. Appreciate you making us a part of your day, however it is, wherever it is you're doing so. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. Make sure you're getting all the great college football content that we're pumping out. If you're listening on the podcast feed, drop a 5-star review. Goes a long way in helping out the channel. See you tomorrow for another episode of the Daily Huddle.